All right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are, live on YouTube. All right. So, guys, welcome in to Tactical Podcast number 70 with me, your host, Will Sherlin of Gutter Fighting Secrets. Today, we've got Dr. Chris Larsen on the program. Now, I am super excited to have Chris on. Dr. Larsen has an extremely colorful and versatile background. I'm just pulling up his resume now due to technical difficulties. We had to close out of some windows. So we are coming right back in here, and we're going to get things all set up. So right off the bat, Dr. Larsen is I believe, former E6, which is a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. And I'm going to pull up the rest of his resume here. It's guys, it's large and long. So let's get into it. All right. So bear with me for a second, guys. We had to. This is the problem. We had to close out a window and then reopen another one. And then sometimes with these things, technology fails on you, but you keep going. And that's the real piece of the pie here. So I'm going to start with now and work my way back. So senior training manager, General Dynamics Information Technology, training unit manager, Greenleaf Integrative, training unit manager, advanced business learning at the Millington Naval Air Station in Tennessee. Dr. Larsen is also an author and researcher. He's written a number of really awesome books, including Small Unit Tactics and is it airsoft and paintball as well. And and the Small Unit Tactics book actually is something really cool here, because I know certain units in the military, and I don't know if I'm at liberty to say which ones, but they still use this book quite heavily. And I've been told that, sometimes you'll know when new class is spinning up because there's a bunch of orders that get placed for that book. So, he's got some really great books out there on Amazon. And as well, he's been a lead instructional systems designer with cubic defense applications, military advisor. Guys, the resume keeps going and going and going. Also, English language teacher in the Korean Ministry of Education. And like I said, former Army infantry officer and current commandant of the One Shepherd training program, founder of the One Shepherd training program. So, Chris, now that I've butchered all of that and struggled to get all of everything together, welcome on to the podcast, man. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
So like I said, I'm pretty stoked to get you on today. I've got a whole list here of things that I want to talk about with you, but you're I got to be honest with you, man, amongst the rank and file at One Shepherd, you're kind of a mystery man because nobody knows exactly what it is that you've done and what you do. And it's a matter of great speculation. So I want to start kind of at the beginning. I know now you work for DSS and State Department and everything, and we'll just leave it at that. But going back to when Dr. Larsen was not Dr. Larsen, and he was a fresh-faced 18-year-old kid right into the military. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got your start working for the military?
Sure. So in my family, for 100 years, the Larsens came over to the United States in the 1880s. The Blesses came over in the 1840s, just before that. The Blesses are my mom's side of the family. They came over just before a good German, stock came over right before the American Civil War. And honestly, I have on that side of the family, I have two of my ancestors fought on the Union side, and one of them fought on the Confederate side. All three of them there in Missouri. So if you know the history, it's probably the most active, west of the Mississippi. It was pretty dynamic and pretty bloody. And so anyway, so I have some history there, but not a whole lot. The Larsens really just don't go that far back into America. Like I said, the Larsens in name show up in the 1880s. And then they were dodging, honestly, they were dodging the forced conscription of soldiers into the Germanic armies at the time. So they came here, and instead they, from 1880 on, have fought in every American conflict. I honestly, you're going to be hard pressed to find American conflict that that my ancestors haven't fought in. So we're Norsemen who went to Viking, and that's kind of where that tradition is. On the blessed side, they answered the call of duty, and I can point that out. I mean, there's some really impressive stuff, from medical doctors to Green Berets to, you name it, and still serve. People with the blessed name still serve. But it was mixed because they also were journalists. And so I have two sets of grandparents, great grandparents and grandparents, who have been honored in the Hall of Fame in journalism, both the grandmother and the grandfather. And so the rich journalism, and that's a weird combination, as you can guess, that you have this warrior tradition with this journalistic tradition. So that kind of the writing was on the wall for me. These are where you're going to go. And so when people say, wow, it's so weird that this grunt, this knuckle dragging infantryman picked up a pen and started writing books. No, that wasn't a surprise for anyone in my family. They were saying, yeah, we told you should have been a journalist. So, but instead I followed the warrior path. And yeah, I looked at it. I said, well, if I'm going to do this, let's go where the axe meets the grindstone, where all the sparks fly. Let's go infantry. So I went infantry, and in 1985, you took a vow against foreign enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, you knew what the foreign was. It wasn't against the Soviet people or the Chinese, North Korean, Cuban people. It wasn't. We weren't taught to hate them. We were fully indoctrinated into hating Marxists. And so that's exactly who you expected at the other end of your bayonet. That's who you thought you were going to kill. I know this sounds ridiculous today. It does, especially if you weren't born and lived through that time. Then it's easy to forget that in the 1970s, the Soviet Union, not Russia, the Soviet Union was spending 26 of their gross domestic product on military. And you cannot sustain this beyond a year or two or three without an utter and complete collapse. And so we knew this was the largest military in the world, and they were coming across the Fulda Gap in Europe, and we were going to have Armageddon. It was not just going to be World War III. It was going to be the final deciding battle of humanity. And we firmly believed this in the 1970s and 80s, because no one could imagine then that in 1989, December 1989, the Soviet Union would just go away with a whimper because it ran out of money. And East Germany and the Iron Curtain would just fold up and be carried away with the Soviets. And the Soviets wouldn't even call themselves Soviets anymore. When you see this kind of a hyper superpower, you can't imagine it's just going to go, whoops, out of money. Okay, we're leaving. With all of that hardware, you know they're going to take their last shot. So anyway, that's what I went in. I earnestly believed I was never going to see my 21st birthday. But you had to go do your duty. And so come from a long line of institution. I've already said military and journalism, Roman Catholic. So, I just went from one institution to another. And in that way, I'll go ahead and confess, if I ever start to wax poetic and try to convince you that I've had an original thought in my head, I am lying to you. No, I'm not creative. I'm institutional. But on the other hand, I do have a couple of brain cells that I like to rub together once in a while, and I can figure things out. So that's what I'm successful in institutions because of that. And but yeah, that's where I went. I went into the military in 1985 for all the right reasons. I got out in 1994 for all the right reasons. I had a lot more to offer, and they just said, yeah, we really don't want that from you. And so then I walked away from that contract.
So after the military, then you started with what exactly? Were you then moving on to consulting, or did you go into writing after that?
So, okay. So what happens in 1994 is I get out and I do what everybody who gets out of the military does. I flounder. I mean, I just like a fish out of water. It was horrible. I don't want you guys to see it. But, on the other hand, it's some real strong character developing there because, in the Army, it's not that I'm going, wow, paycheck to paycheck. How am I going to feed myself? How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to pay for the vehicle? I didn't have that. And for the next 3 years, I really, truly did have that kind of flopping around. And I say I went and tried several different jobs. I bought and sold people's broken dreams as a pawnbroker. I was a bartender. I ran my own company for a year. And so I did a bunch of different things. But eventually I wound up going back to South Korea as an English teacher, and spent 2 years there working for the Korean government. And I really found that I liked education. And for me, that was the aha moment. I went, okay, now I know what I wanted to do all along. I was good at being a teacher in the infantry, and I'm good at being a teacher in the public school. Let me go back to grad school for this after 2 years. Funny story there is, all right, I'll go ahead and say it. Two of my uncles on my mom's side of the family were Green Beret, right? And I have a cousin in this right now. He's Green Beret with 5th Group. And anyway, when they got out of their service, they wound up being spies. Let me just go ahead and call a duck a duck. That's what they were. This is during the, Cold War. It was cloak and dagger. And they did some really cool stuff that my family was vaguely aware of what they were doing. Vaguely. They were like, we don't know what they do, but we kind of know what they do. And so when I went off to Korea, I told my brothers, told my father, my aunts and uncles, hey, I'm going to Korea. And they all said, right. What's your cover story? No, not cover story. I'm going to go teach in an elementary school, 3rd grade in an elementary school. And they're like, great cover story. So I'm sending pictures of me, Christmas, and I've got all my, my kids around, and they're doing decorations and all this stuff. And my family's just like, wow, you went deep, man. You're living off the reservation. He's gone native, he's gone rogue. And I'm like, you idiots, I'm an English teacher. But I do marry a beautiful young woman at that time from South Korea. We run around the world, and I got into grad school, got into contracting because 9/11 happens while I'm in grad school. And I went, wow, I really am being pulled back into the military industry complex, but more as a contractor, U.S. volunteer, call it militiaman, whatever you want to call it. It was private militaries is essentially what I was part of. And so we're running around the world doing this. And my family's still scratching their head because, they're like, so you said you're not in a spy? And I'm like, no. And they're like, then why are you patrolling with the Iraqi infantry and inside of Iraq? And I'm like, oh man, it was going to be hard to explain. Then they get out, and I started working at the Command and General Staff College, over at Fort Leavenworth. And my daughters are born and all this, and they're trying to explain to their friends and family, those guys are saying, what's your dad do? Well, he's an instructional systems designer. Like, what's that? And they said, we don't know. We think he's a spy. Yeah. It was like, wow. So this was the running joke of the family. They don't know what I do, my own family. They're like, he does something for the Department of the Defense or Energy or, And then I wound up with USAID doing humanitarian work over in Central Africa. And so again, what do people say? Oh, he's not doing humanitarian work. I'm like, for God's sake, guys, I'm over here doing humanitarian work in Central Africa. And no one believes you. I wind up now, and I can't talk too much about it, but I am with the diplomatic security, Bureau of Diplomatic Security in the State Department. And my daughters are now teenagers, and they're like, aha, we got you. And I'm like, oh my God, guys, you're so far off. But I have to admit, you look at my trail and you go, wow, it really does look like you're doing some CIA stuff. And I promise I'm not. I'm just not. Nope, just not me. I'm a nerd. That's why they hired me. And they're like, yeah, okay, we'll get this.
Great cover story, man.
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that. I'm like, but it's not true. All right.
So yeah, whatever, man. Okay. No, that's fascinating, dude. It's really cool that you went back over to Korea. Now, when you say back over, I'm assuming during your time in the military, you spent some time in South Korea?
Yeah, I did. My very first tour, they asked, where do you want to go? No one. In 1985, no one said, I want to go to Korea, because as hot as Central America was and the Sinai, and as touch and go as Europe was, the real shooting war where people killed each other was still in Korea, the DMZ. And so my cousin had just come back. He's 5 years infantry NCO. His career ended in the DMZ. He got in a battle with North Koreans and he lost his kneecap, wound up in a river in the middle of the night in the winter and stuck by mines, had to rescue him by a helicopter. So, and that was it. He lived, but whoop, you got no knee. And so I knew very much, and that was like not even 2 years, 18 months before I went there, I think. And so I knew exactly what I was going into because both of my uncles, my father had served in Korea. In fact, they started their careers there in the late 50s. And so I said, yeah, okay, well, that's where I'm going to go. I went there and July 4th, 1986 was my very first gun battle, my very first firefight in my life. I was all of just 19 years old. Yep.
Wow. I'd be honest, I didn't know that the U.S. and communist forces even exchanged gunfire in Korea after the Korean War.
With great regularity and still to this day. And when I say they're not just taking pot shots. I mean, in one of the most egregious incidents, closer to 20 years ago, submarines sank, a naval vessel, sent like 56 guys to the grave in one fell swoop. So, and this is a little bit of it, if you don't mind me talking about that. Yeah. So from 1953, July 1953 to October 1991, U.S. forces patrolled inside the DMZ nonstop, round the clock. And the Second Korea campaign, as it came to be called, was during the Vietnam War when the North Koreans knew, hey, we can push these guys' buttons. And so during that time, you do a 3-month combat tour inside the DMZ, patrolling. It's landmines, it's machine guns, it's ambushes, and reconnaissance, and you're killing each other. A 800-man battalion had the same casualty rate as an 800-man battalion, infantry battalion in Vietnam. It was brutal. Look it up. So in 2005, I think, the Veterans of Foreign Wars came and literally shamed the Pentagon in front of Congress. They called a congressional hearing and shamed them into admitting this. And the story, we weren't in there. I don't think it's filmed, but it was done behind closed doors. But the story we're told is that the VFW walked in and said, okay, how many prisoners of war, U.S. prisoners of war from 1953, this is the end of the war, from 53 to 91, how many POWs did the Americans lose? And they said, the Pentagon representative said something like, I think we lost 51. And they're like, no, it's 54. Do you need the names? I'll give you the names of the 54 people. You should know all the people who were taken prisoner. And some of them we haven't gotten back yet. And they're like, okay, we concede. And they said, how many people were killed in that same time period? And they said, we believe it's slightly over 1,000. He says, no, it was 1,258 killed, U.S. soldiers killed in that time frame. And they went, okay, we'll take your word for that. And, Congression, everybody's nodding their head going, geez, what's this guy? And then they said, how many were wounded? And the Pentagon representative said, we haven't got a clue. And he said, would you believe it was 3,000? Yes. Would you believe it was 4,000? Yes. Would you believe it was 5,000? Yes. Yeah, well, the answer is we don't know either, is what the VFW said. So they march out. Congress says, give them all a service campaign, give them a combat service ribbon, give everybody who served in that time. And so finally, for the first time in 60 years, the service of those people who went to the DMZ and went into Korea and served behind the DMZ as well, they was finally recognized with a campaign ribbon. And so you are not alone. Most of America does not know. And I'm torn. Honestly, it's got a bigger implication, and I don't want to go too far down this, but the bigger implication is this. We left Vietnam because of casualties. We left Beirut in 1980s because of casualties. We left Somalia in the 1990s because of casualties. We abandoned the Iraqi people, and then we abandoned the Afghani people because of casualties. And America just didn't have the stomach to stay. When you pick a war, you're supposed to stay for 2.5 generations, bare minimum. And when you look where we've been successful, Italy, 75 years. Germany, 75 years. Japan, 75 years. Korea, 70 years. Look at anywhere we've been successful. We've stayed a minimum of 2.5 generations. That's 50 years. And by the way, the RAND studies, don't take my word for it. Go look at How Insurgencies End. It's one of the RAND think groups, the big think tanks. They wrote a book called How Insurgencies End, I think around 2000. I want to say it was 2009. And they conclude the same thing. They say, look, it takes a generation to win the peace, takes a generation to win the economics, and it takes another generation, roughly, to have an expectation of representative government. So 50 to 60 years. Well, how is that achieved in South Korea? Because we didn't want the American people in the 50s to know that our boys were coming back in boxes. So they hid it. And then during Vietnam, well, they hid it, and it was very easy to hide there. And then in the 70s and 80s, they hid it. And this is exactly what the Pentagon reported to the congressional hearing in 2005. Well, we had a policy of hiding casualties, POWs, wounded, killed in action. We hid that from the American people. And here's the weird, bitter pill to swallow. It was successful. It was wildly successful. Korea is today. In 1950s, Korea had been so ravaged by the Japanese, so beaten. Most people were, regarded them as apes, primates, subhuman. They said they'll never be peaceful. They'll never be advanced. These people have had for 3 generations their dignity stripped away and have been used and raped and abused as cannon fodder for this whole entire period by the Japanese. They'll never be human again. Today, they are one of the most peaceful, plugged in, technologically advanced communities and cultures. They have representative government that kind of puts ours to shame. They are a wild success, unlike we've ever seen. Unlike all of America's successes, this is the benchmark. And yet it was achieved by lying to the American people so that we didn't give up and pull out.
Wow, man, I didn't know any of that. So I guess it did work. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard, man.
Yeah.
So as a Cold Warrior, man, I mean, you've literally been in the trenches in the Cold War. Now we're looking at what's going on in politics in America today. Does it frustrate you sometimes?
Yes, I have to, do a reality check once in a while, pinch myself, drink a beer, call somebody and say, did I just see that on the news? They're like, yeah, man, you did. I'm like, okay. Because I thought in 1985, we took vows to shoot people like that in the face, but now they're running for office. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't have ever thought, man, that this would go down like this has thusly far in America. It's the wildest thing, and it's only because we really are such a great and tolerant nation, and like our political system is like so free that would even be tolerated, But it is kind of a slap in the face to guys like you and your comrades who literally went over there and shed their blood and tears while fighting this thing. So
it is a slap in the face in some sense, and it's not quite the way you think it is, though. I'm happy. I'm actually it's what you were just saying. The fact is that we are a plural society, and we are an open society, and I'm very proud of that. I feel a lot of great satisfaction in that. And if I've contributed, and if I have, it's been in a very small way, any kind of contribution I had to it. But nonetheless, I'm proud of our plurality. And that means I'm okay with, I don't like them, I don't endorse them, but I'm okay with the fact that Antifa and BLM wave their banners right next to the KKK and neo-Nazis. And I disagree with all of them fundamentally, right? But I'm like, yeah, but this is America. It's all right that we have communists and socialists running for office because this is America, right? So in that sense, it doesn't offend me. What offends me is when they start passing laws or policy, bureaucratic policy that violate individual rights, individual human rights, particularly those enumerated in our U.S. Constitution, those that are implied in our Declaration of Independence. That is what greatly offends me. And don't get me wrong. Let's be honest. while I will agree with anybody saying, yeah, it's the progressive left that does all that, or no, but if you say they do most of it, I'm going to nod my head. Hey, I've seen the conservative right really go against human rights as
Oh
well.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, you know, we saw what was happening during the Bush administration and all of that, and they're on both sides. When you face any extreme, whether it's on the left or the right,
Mhm.
it's never good. You know, that's never good. You know, with that being said, I think most people fall kind of in the center. You know, most true Americans or true Americans, what does that even mean? Most Americans fall pretty much somewhere in the center, and they agree with something over here and something over there. So, you know, whenever we see radicals of any kind, that's what really starts to make me nervous personally.
And I think the thing is just to remember what you just said. If we were to draw a bell curve, you would see just the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of Americans in the center, somewhere left of center, somewhere right of center, or the center. But that's not who gets FaceTime in, in news media, in social media. Who gets FaceTime is, of course, the radicals, the fringe, because it's newsworthy. It's wow, they're saying something so radically different, and I'm like, not really. They've been saying the same thing they've been, espousing since, I don't know, Marx and, and slavery, right?
Right.
So,
Right. Santiago, what's going on, man? Santiago says, "What's up?" So we are talking now. You came and you went to South Korea. You spent some time in Iraq. When did you start getting into writing like the small unit tactics books and things like that?
yeah, all right. So, One Shepherd starts in 1981, and all it is today, if you go back to 1981, you'd look at it and rightfully say, oh, this is Milsim. It's just a bunch of Milsim.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's just that Milsim wasn't a term yet. Quite literally, paintball markers. They're markers, and they were for marking trees. The Forest Service used them at the time to mark trees, and cattle ranchers used it to mark cows. And so that's they were just a single shot, like weird, almost looked like some kind of like needle injection into your arm or something, but it fired a paintball. And so this is all that exists. There's no Woods Ball, there's no Milsim in 1981. But we're a bunch of high school and college nerds that are going, what is this thing called tactics? What are these things called guerrilla tactics? Why do we see this, read about it, and see it in Hollywood? And so we set about to try to understand it. There was a scholarly pursuit to it. We picked up field manuals and any other kind of, augment, literature to try and understand it. And then literally drew on, paper. Well, let's try this. Let's try this. And we'd go out and try that in Saturday afternoon. And these built up to, of course, 2-day and 3-day war games. What today we call a field training exercise, right? Or FTX simulation. Well, it's just a war game. And so we would do this. We would do this with great regularity, and it keeps going from 1981 to 1995. And there's a whole lot to talk about there. But what happens in the mid 90s is a bunch of guys who had been different generations of One Shepherd started getting out of the Marines and the Army and the Air Force and all this stuff. And they came back and they said, hey, let's get back and jump back into this in the Midwest. And they did. But what you see was there were 3 discrete groups that very clearly formed. Civilians who'd never done any of this, military guys who were not combat arms, but at least had discipline to, they could study better. And then you had combat arms guys, primarily infantry. And these guys were just cleaning house. And it, like, firefights were no longer lasting, 45 minutes or 2 hours. They were literally measured in seconds. Well, that one lasted a minute and a half. That one was 2 minutes, and it was over. And so people said, whoa, something's going on here. Let's start a training program that tries to bring everybody up on the same platform in small unit tactics. So, and warrior fieldcraft. So we started that, but it was like 6 NCOs. I think there was 1 officer, and of the 6 NCOs and officer, I think 3 or 4 of us were infantry, Marine and Army infantry. And we all went, man, we're building a leadership course. This is what the NCO Academy, Officer Candidate School. This is, it's a little bit of Ranger School. It's a little bit of basic training, but it's mostly leadership academies that you would see in the military. And we all agreed. We're all like, yeah, well, this is exactly what I taught. This is what I went through, We're like, okay, well, let's just do that. Let's embrace it. And in 1995, we said, let's just embrace it. We've always been a leadership school. Let's just do it. And then we built a very deliberate curriculum. And that made my very first book. It was not a commercially available book. We printed it in-house in South Korea. And we built like 60 copies run, and I sent it to all the instructors and people like this so that we'd have continuity in training. And that got my brother's phone tapped by the FBI for 30 days, not joking at all. They're like, what in the world is going on with this? And so they tapped his phone at his apartment. And when they went to the Weston police and they said this at 30 days later, like, hey, we have to inform you, we're obliged to inform you that we've been listening to, this group over here. And we've, the cops, the Weston cops who knew us and loved us, they were like, why didn't you just ask us? And they're like, well, because this is an operation and you didn't have a need to know. And they're like, okay, what'd you find? And they said, well, nothing illegal or illicit. It's kind of interesting, but there's just an inordinate amount of firearms that come and go out of that point. And the cops were like, no kidding. We've known about this for almost 20 years. I think it was 20 years at that point. And they're like, what are you thinking? But the cool thing about being above the board and being, yes, investigated by NSA, FBI, state troopers, BATF. I've had my house ransacked by them. Ransacked. They were very respectful. But the cool thing about being above the board is they all go, at the end of it, it's so common that they go, man, this is a really cool program. Can my son come? And we're like, yeah, of course he can. And, and we've actually recruited people that way, like cops going, okay, cool. So it's just very above the board, but that got the first book out. And from there, people said, hey, okay, that's good, but this is a train the trainer book. This is not a book for people coming in. And so from that came my very first commercially available book. It was self-published through Author House, but is Light Infantry Tactics. And it's still a perennial favorite. That book is still in print, and I've tried to kill it so many times, and Author House is like, no, it's still selling fine, leave it alone. And people tell me, like, our entire militia out here in Oregon has it, like, great, go for it, but it really was to try and teach what we do to novices. That's what that is. It's like, okay, the uninitiated. What do you do for light infantry dismounted tactics? And this is for the uninitiated. Let's use common language and let's get out there and teach you something that you can start putting into effect. Now, from that, one shepherd said, hey, we need another book. And so there was supposed to be the platoon and squad, something like FM 7-8. It was going to be the platoon and squad battle tactics. And it's a fantastic book. Really, it is, if I can say that. It's just really good because it meant this is for the warriors of One Shepherd going through our 6-semester program. And I really liked it, but the publishers hated the title. And they said, this will never sell. And so we're going to change it to Airsoft and Paintball Battle Tactics, or Paintball and Airsoft Battle Tactics, right? And they changed it. And they put it in bookstores in paintball. And it is my worst selling book ever. This thing is, it's horrible. I think it sold, it's got respectable. It's not that bad, but I think it's just a little over 10,000, maybe 11,000 copies sold. So it just didn't go anywhere. And the Achilles heel was this horrible title, Paintball and Airsoft Battle Tactics. The reason that's such a horrible title is paintball and airsoft guys don't think of themselves as kiddos. Oh, it's just like patting them on the head in a very condescending way, saying, look at you making make believe. Okay, you go play Army. Well, you know what? Playing Army is a very, very valuable, if it's done right, even if it's done half-assed, it's an incredible experiential learning. It really is. And it was designed by Helmut Moltke. Tabletop wargaming, was purposefully designed by the Prussians way back in the mid 1800s, and it has incredible legitimacy to this very day across militaries, globally, right? And so it's condescending to say to paintball and airsofters, oh, look at you playing Army. And so I wanted to avoid that. And I've made sure I haven't repeated that mistake. Look, they don't look in paintball and airsoft for military tactics to play milsim. They go into the military book section. And that's not where you find that book, unfortunately. So, but yeah, that's what it was. And everything since then, that's when I got picked up from those two books. I got picked up by the Lightning Press. And now my books are quite literally purchased through numerous military schools. And the Lightning Press, that's true. Their book titles, 26 book titles, and 70% of their sales are to military schools, not to soldiers. 70%. My titles, that is also the case. It's selling to schools. And of course, as you already mentioned, most notably, the Naval Special Warfare and the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Schools are big consumers of it. My cousin, he was enlisted, and then he bootstrapped after he made his E6. He bootstrapped to become a warrant officer. And again, he's with the Green Berets in 5th Group. And when he went to warrant school there at JFK, he called me up and he says, Chris, you won't believe this. Your book, I got like 12 books and yours was right on the top. So I grabbed this and went, this is my cousin. This is my cousin. He was walking around going, this is my cousin wrote this. So I was like, yeah, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that. So anyway.
That's so impressive, man. So where did you, obviously you've had a knack for writing, okay? And you've learned most of what you learned in the military. And then also, outside of the military doing not only just, contracting stuff, but wargaming on your own, back in your hometown. So do you think that that's primarily like how you were able to become such an accomplished writer that now even the military, all of these different branches, like literally issue your book for their men to read?
Yeah, well, that's a big praise. So first off, thank you. And you're being generous.
It's true. It's the truth, man. That's a big deal.
I think there's a great quote from Beethoven that I'll butcher, but he says something to the effect of, don't just know your art, but invest yourself, immerse yourself in your art, because that is the pathway to divine truth. And I love that quote, though I butchered it. I love that quote because I feel like, I heard a world famous Russian ballerina one time said, every 5-year-old girl wants to be a ballerina. I just never lost sight of my dreams. And I say, yeah, every 5-year-old boy wants to be a soldier when he grows up, a warrior. I just never lost sight of my dreams. And for me, it very much turned into a scholarly pursuit. And when I say that, that doesn't mean you need to go to the university. In fact, you probably won't find much in the university for you there. But it does mean that, yeah, you should continually learn and never get to a point where you say, well, I know it all now, because I certainly don't. I mean that. That's not being humble. I certainly do not know. I'm still learning, even through, I'm on social media and we're having communication threads and I'm going, what? Oh, wait, I didn't. Some of it's little tidbit facts, nothing super important, earth shattering. But once in a while, there's like, whoa, hold on. And it sends me down a path to go research for a couple or few months so that I can understand this phenomenon. I think that's just it, is never be so confident that you know it all, because you don't. I stood on the shoulders of giants, and I mean that. And the people that I've worked with in my life, both in contracting and in the military, know exactly who they are, because they were the giants that I stood on their shoulders. And just like a kid standing on a giant's shoulder who says, look how tall I am, Daddy. I sometimes think, wow, look how tall I am. But when I look down, I realize I'm not that tall. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So keep that in mind. And yes, for me, it was a very scholarly pursuit. I was blessed to realize I wanted to go into education. My master's degree taught me how to study. How to study this as a scholarly pursuit. And then in my doctorate, I got to study human factors, human cognition. So that's my area of specialties. My PhD is in learning technologies from the University of Missouri, Columbia. It's learning technologies with an emphasis area of educational sports psychology. And what that meant was I studied at One Shepherd. I got the joy, the honor of studying them, wearable technologies in learning environments, and trying to figure out how are these guys, how are they making sense? How are they making sense of environments that they are unaccustomed to? And I think that's a real rich environment, because people make the mistake of thinking, well, One Shepherd's only for law enforcement and military. No, it's designed for civilians. 50% of everybody there is either in law enforcement and military or going on to law enforcement and military, but we often forget the other 50% aren't and never will serve in that capacity. And so it's really written for civilians. And I got to jump into that and study 2 years. I got to study, how are you making sense of this? And by the way, we then got into decision making models, again, human cognition under austere, time pressured conditions, right? Life and death decision making. And we discovered, I wasn't the only researcher, I was a group of several researchers, and we discovered patterns that mated very neatly. And it was just such an exciting moment, to say, wow, John Boyd's OODA loop, that was really pressed out in the 50s and 60s, and Klein's RPD, recognition prime decisions, that was panned out in the 80s and 90s. And then in the 2010s, I'm working with some just brilliant, researchers, and we discovered the idiom model. And so, which is a question-based model, how you see danger. And we were working with combat veterans, not just students, but literally combat arms veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And so they pan this out, and it's very promising. It's published in the Infantry Journal at Fort Benning, Georgia, U.S. Army. And so if you want to pick up an article there, but yeah, it's IDIOM. It's the idiom model, or so actually that's how it's pronounced. It's actually the engagement decision matrix, EDM, pronounced idiom. Engagement, yes, the EDM. Engagement decision matrix. And so this ties RPD, because everybody knew RPD was related to OODA. We just didn't know how. And I think we really had a breakthrough at One Shepherd doing a 2-year study on this.
Yeah, it's fascinating how, not only are you guys obviously training people in leadership, but you're also making it a case study for yourself to see, hey, how do guys process this information? How do they learn? How do they not learn? All of that is really valuable information as well, I would think, for not only for the military, but, even I think you and I had this discussion when I was going through the leadership course there, the pipeline, is that even in business, this would be an invaluable, information to have.
Absolutely. So here's the thing, the Army gets a whole lot wrong, but once in a blue moon, they get something right. And I like how they described it. Mind you, I've heard a lot of descriptions of leadership versus management. And the reality is I haven't heard a bad one yet, but I really like the Army, and they draw a helix, like a DNA, right? A double helix, looks like DNA. And what they say about this is one line is management, one line is leadership. They are inextricably intertwined. You cannot separate them, yet they are discrete. They are not the same thing at all. There's a red line and a blue line going down there. And what they mean by that is management is industry specific. It is always industry specific. Are you into carpentry? Are you into shipping? Are you into the library science? Are you into, religious missionary work? Are you, whatever you are into? Military is just one of many different industries. And so it's always industry specific. The other line in that double helix is leadership. And it is not a science, it's an art, and it is universal. It does not change from one industry or one human endeavor to the next. Leadership is leadership. And so once you learn that, now you say, oh, but you can't teach leadership without management. Correct, you cannot. And in One Shepherd, I'm going to teach you how to run combat patrols and manage those. But I'm teaching you, we're very specifically teaching you, these are leadership tasks, these are leadership competencies. And so you're right, it applies to, I don't care if you're a librarian. I just don't care. The leadership is the same.
Yeah, and not like you said, man. Not only Is it teaching you managerial skills, leadership skills, but more specific, even just human interaction skills? Like when you have guys who have only been through 2 semesters and then you immediately throw them into the leadership pipeline and you say, here's a small fire team, go and manage them. Go and take care of them for 3 days out in the field. You're saying, well, I've only had like a couple days of training, but I'm going to do my best. And through that, like jump right in the fire, you learn more than I think you would in a semester of college by doing it that way.
Absolutely, you do. This is the experiential learning model, ELM, and we plagiarize everybody. By the way, I said I don't have an original thought. I didn't come up with the experiential learning model. That is Kolb, Andrew Kolb, is that right? But anyway, Kolb's ELM. Yeah, you literally Wikipedia, and what it says is just what you said. Will, it said, look, we learn more from doing than we do from listening, reading, all this stuff. Doing. So, you want to start with an orientation. Okay, tell me what, you're going to empty trash cans. Okay, now I have my orientation. And here's what we want you to get out of emptying trash cans. You're going to lead these other 2 people. And here's the task. Great, I know the task. I'm oriented. I know my team. Let me go empty these trash cans. You do it. Then you come back and we say, this is you had that experience. And now in front of a master trash can man guy, you say, all right, so I did it. Now you have to reflect on it. And you're like, okay, I'll reflect on it. And the master trash guy is going to come over and say, what did you think was going to happen? Well, this is my first time leading the trash crew. I thought this and this and this would happen. Oh, really? What actually happened? Well, this and this and this is what actually happened. Right, so there's a gap here. Let's explore that gap. Why did things go worse than you thought? Why did they go better than you thought? How can you sustain the better and how can you improve the worse? And that experiential model was panned out literally in the 1950s, and it's just brilliant. One Shepherd is not the first to use it. Again, we didn't come up it, we didn't thunk it up. But we are always implementing these methodologies and refining these methodologies as an institution. It's where our pride is that, hey, we can do this and we can do this better. So we've had a wonderful success there. The other methodology, since I'm mentioning it, is what's called, it sounds very similar to experiential learning. It's called expeditionary learning, and this is outward bound. Let me remind you that outward bound starts in the wake of, that's funny, pun intended. It starts in the wake of World War II. It's a bunch of sailors who took people out sailing and said, we've lost these critical skills in the Navy. We want to establish those. Well, this continues and continues. And by the 1980s, they're climbing, mountain, snow-covered peaks in Alaska, and they're ziplining through jungles in Panama. And they're just traveling the globe and doing wonderful stuff for survival and, environmental awareness and, yes, leadership. And so they're doing this, and they really pioneer the expeditionary learning model. And I'll give you a quick, easy example. In high school, I can teach you how to bake, right? Home ec, I can teach you how to bake, but you don't have an audience. I mean, you really don't have an audience. And you wouldn't bake in a high school class. You'd bake in a kitchen, and you might even bake in a commercial kitchen. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick up my high school class. I'm going to take them to do all the prep work. We're going to bake. We're baking lasagnas for a local restaurant, and we're baking for their customers at lunch. Do you see what I did? I took them out of the class and we put them into a real world experience, an authentic experience. And then you don't always have real clients, but if you can, that's what you want. You want clients for these learners. And then you take them back and you do the same sort of reflection. So experiential learning and expeditionary learning go hand in hand. They feed each other brilliantly. And that's what One Shepherd is.
We talk a lot about the importance of, after it's all said and done, talking about it and learning from it. Now, I'm assuming that for those of you guys who haven't been yet to One Shepherd, we do a lot of after action reviews and hot washes after almost everything that we do. Even, into the wee hours of the morning if we have to at night, and it's tiring, but is that really such an important process of, hey, you've done it, let's talk about it. Is that how you're able to learn so quickly at One Shepherd?
That reflection process and the after action review, even in just a short, brief hot wash. And don't forget that at the end of the, at the end of the semester, each semester is a 7 days out in the wilderness, right? And at the end of the semester, we pull all the primary leaders and we put them into one-on-one against all of your black hats in what's called a murder board. And that also is a critical, and this is where they get to speak less, privately, not publicly, but privately, and they reflect there. In each of those cases, what you really have going on is you have a learner, so a novice, who is saying, okay, exploring the gap. Here's what really happened, but this is what I thought should happen. Here's the difference. And they're saying, maybe next time I try that, or should I have been aware of this? And they're able to say this not just in front of their peers. That's very critical because their peers are helping them learn, but they're also saying it in front of your black hat masters. And so they're saying, hey, you have mastery level here. Is this right? And the master will say, well, it can be under these and these conditions, but it may not be under these conditions. So you get to, that's called reification, taking an abstract concept and making it as close to tangible, physical as possible. So the process is called reification. And certainly in learning, that's what you're doing in that reflection, is you're reifying principal concepts.
So I understand that you have been doing this since before your career in the military, and it's a passion of yours. Is there any other reason why you decided to officially create One Shepherd and train, I would say young men and women in paramilitary leadership?
Sure. We cut to the chase. It's philanthropy. No one in 40 years, we just wrapped up our 40th year. This was our 41st. No one in 40 years has ever received a dime. When I say no one's paid a dime, I mean none of your black hat, green hat instructors, none of your rifle company or regimental staff, none of the board of directors have ever been compensated monetarily in any way, shape, or form. And so this is, obviously and absolutely, it's philanthropy. It is our way of giving back. I stood on the shoulders of giants. I owe it to the next generation to boost them up, to raise them up. That's come on, guys. This is humanity. It's not that I'm against capitalism. I'm an unapologetic capitalist. But this is the way I give back, is to raise those people up and give them the same kind of opportunities that I had. And so absolutely there's that motivating factor. Now, why military models? Well, because in 1995, I looked around and I had a bunch of military. Could we have done it with firefighters? If I had a bunch of forced firefighters in 1985, we might be masking up and the enemy might be smoke generators and we're pretending fighting fires. The reality is we had a bunch of soldiers, then we got weapons and night vision and miles gear and so it went from there, and it's very sexy. It sells to young men. We only have 3% of our student body is female, but there are females who come and they do very well. So, I'm unapologetic there. It is a male-dominated environment. It is a warrior ethos. But there's also this notion that, well, the military has this secret sauce. And I've had people say, either scorningly or very, concerned, oh my gosh, what if you give away the secret sauce? And I say, it's not a secret sauce. It's open source, man. You can go look at there's PDFs all over Google. I'm not selling anything that is a secret sauce. And then they almost get disappointed. Well, you're not going to teach us these special forces tactics? Yeah, I am. They're called small unit tactics. And they're like, what? No, this can't be true. There has to be some secret handshake, eye wink sort of thing that, and I'm like, no, guys, it doesn't work that way. And these are really critical life skills for you to have, primarily, of course, leadership. And no one has the secret sauce. No one owns this. This is available to all of us and should be.
You bring up the fact that this is exactly what most special forces teams do. Now, you mentioned at the 40th anniversary at the end, I think it was a 51-day pipeline that the Rangers go through, something like that in small unit tactics?
58 days.
58 days. And One Shepherd is how many days?
The initial graduation is 42. Okay. So that's to get your warrior leader. And if you want that triple tab, if you want that black hat, and that is another 16. So it comes out exactly 58 days.
And the really important part here is once you do graduate that 6 semester pipeline, it's even more important, I think, in my personal opinion, to say, hey, I'm going to actually become a green hat instructor, which for those of you guys and girls don't know, green hat would be the first level instructor where you're learning. And then black hat would be, like Dr. Larsen said, kind of the more of a mastery, and you know what's up now. Now you're going to teach the teacher. So it would be very important to go through if you really want to know this stuff, not only to do it, but then to start teaching it as well, if I'm correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do. Our claim to fame is not only that we graduate black hats, but our black hats go off to other organizations and work for them. In fact, several of our black hats have started their own training companies, commercial training companies, and hallelujah. Others serve in, we've had black hats who serve in different state militias and state guards. And so, this is fantastic. What I'm saying is there's cross-pollination.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually just got back from Operation Winter Forge out there with SNS, and the quality of instruction there, man, is on par with One Shepherd. 100%. What they're doing is amazing. So, like you said, you've got these other guys sprouting up from what you guys are doing and bringing it, even making it more available for supplemental training and stuff. And I think you were saying about Winter Forge was that you guys wanted to do winter training, but no one would sign up for it. So you're glad that they actually did it.
Absolutely. Look, you're right. You're right to call it. What Light Fighter Studies Group and SNS Training Solutions have strong relationships with One Shepherd, and their cadre. You look and you're like, hey, some of these guys are black-headed One Shepherd cadre. Absolutely, they are. And again, no apologies there. But what's wonderful about those organizations is they understand and they're very respectful of the fact that One Shepherd is a leadership course. It is a leadership school. And what they said is, well, there's a whole lot more for warriors to do. Will, there's just so much that a warrior can know. So they go into fieldcraft and crew served weapons and all the sort of stuff that One Shepherd and care under fire. One Shepherd doesn't have time to dedicate to that because we're predicated on, I'm just going to teach you just enough of these warrior skills so that I can get you into the leadership track and get you trained as a warrior leader, right? That's what I'm supposed to graduate as warrior leaders. But LFSG, Light Fighter Studies Group, and SNS Training Solutions, and Mason-Dixon Tactical, and Max Velocity, and all of these others, they can take you farther. They can teach you more fieldcraft. Look, Brush Beaters has a 6-day RTO course. That's radio operator course, right? 6 days. We give you like a handful of hours. Their 6-day course, I know 2 guys have gone through it personally, good friends of mine, brilliant stuff. If you wanted, that's a necessary. Tactical communications, Brush Beater does it. You don't come to One Shepherd, we'll teach you just enough, but Brush Beater does that. If you want to jump out of airplanes, Liberty Jump Team there in Texas, I'm not talking skydiving, I'm talking static line C-47, get out there and get your 5-jump chump that pin the wings on you and everything. If you want to go to do air assault school, I forget what the name is, but there's a place in Florida, rappelling out of helicopters, doing air assault school, there's scuba schools, there's BSR in facility there in West Virginia. You can do off-road, on-road. You want to learn to drive like Jason Bourne? And you say, the government doesn't really do that. Yes, the government does that. And where they've done that for decades is BSR. So you want to drive like the Bourne Identity, they'll teach you right there. And not just on roads and wet roads, they'll teach you off-road. And not just off-road, they'll teach you off-trail. There are no roads. You're just going through the woods, dude, up a mountain. And so this is where you learn. Where do you learn all that? Well, not One Shepherd. We're a leadership institute. So there's these just wonderful, martial warrior training schools out there that go way beyond firearms. And firearms is the critical thing. You say, okay, what's the most essential existence? What is it? It's to pick up a weapon system and to use it in combat. Can you hit your target? I'm never going to talk bad about firearms, but it is interesting to me that weapon systems, not just firearms. I'm talking about, anti-personnel mines, anti-tank mines, anti-tank rockets, flamethrowers, gas fueled weapon systems, knife, blades, bayonets. I'm talking all weapon systems all together make about 5% of what an infantryman does.
Yeah.
5%. All of them, not just your rifle, all of them, 5%. You go, 5%? What are you doing the rest of the time? Medical, RTO, land navigation, vehicle platforms, insertions, air, vertical insertions. I mean, getting into a ATV and go out to the American Southwest and just take a week of learning how to drive ATVs up and down mountains in the desert. That is warrior training. That is what we're learning to do. And so it's just ginormous. If you ski, cross-country ski, welcome to it, dude. You're out there doing warrior training.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. This is exactly what we do here on Gutter Fighting Secrets. We go to schools and we test them out and we enhance our warrior skills and abilities. And I'm so big on this for all the guys out there who are Gutter Fighting Secrets, part of the GFS family. I always harp on the fact that, listen, all of this shoot 'em up stuff is great. You go to, whatever school you want to think of that teaches you how to shoot and do attack reloads and whatever. But you can only do that for so long before you know how to do it, right? And you always need to practice it. But what is the other stuff that we need to know? All of the stuff that you just said, that's really going to be what makes you survive through, the zombie apocalypse or whatever happens, right? The guys in the Special Forces branch, yeah, I'm sure they're very good shots. But what else do they study that really makes them who they are?
Yeah. Versatility. How many of those special forces guys thought in 2001, 2002, they'd be horseback riding in the mountains?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's all, like you said, and I haven't heard anybody else put it like that, but it's on point. It's all, warrior skills and abilities. And that really harkens back, I think, to like the samurai teachers of old who would say, don't study one discipline, study all disciplines. And that really is what makes a warrior. I want to just touch back real quick on, now you mentioned that, one shepherd had been looked into and ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing and stuff like that. And this was always something that I get the question a lot, like, how are you guys doing that stuff? And what training camp is this? So I'm assuming, not only the fact that you're who you are, right? And you're the head of this program, One Shepherd. That's automatically kind of like, okay, it's legit. But how do you manage that reputation as well? Because I'm sure you've come under fire, not only from, agencies looking into it, but also the civilian sector as well.
Yeah, more from the civilian sectors. Seriously, we come under fire more from civilian sectors. Government, they know how to pull up our files. They know how to look at us, everything. Look, you don't just go buy miles gear. You don't.
Right.
I wanted to know in 2007, early 2007, I wanted to know if I could even, so I called up the prime defense contract, Cubic. And I call them up. Little did I know that I would wind up working for them. But anyway, but I call them up and I said, hey, so this is who I am. And this is what I do with One Shepherd. And I want to know, is it possible for civilians to purchase miles gear? And the guy goes, we've been waiting for this phone call. That's all he says is, we've been waiting for this phone call. This is 2007. Miles started in 1977. He goes, can I call you right back? I said, yeah. I wasn't on the phone with him for 25 seconds. And he's like, yeah, we've been waiting for this phone call. Can I call you right back? I said, yeah. He's like, all right. And he hung up. And I hung up and I thought, that is the weirdest thing. So I'm going to get myself a cup of coffee. I'm walking across the kitchen to get myself a cup of coffee and my phone rings. I was like, oh, wow, he called right back. Pick it up. This is Agent so-and-so from the National Security Agency. Did you just call Cubic Defense and ask them to purchase miles? And I was like, whoa, like, is there a camera in my kitchen? Yeah, I did. How do you know that? And they're like, why would you do that? So I'm explaining myself to him and he says, all right, I'll start the investigation. We'll get back in touch with you. Don't contact Cubic. 90 days. I don't hear a thing. I'm like, well, I guess the answer is no. I don't hear a thing. 90 days. I get a phone call. It's that agent. He's like, you may now. You've been approved. You may now call Cubic. I call him. The guy's like, let's do this. We've been waiting, they're like, we've been waiting forever for someone to do this. Let's do it. So, and then it takes like almost a year, six to 12 months lead time for them to build your stuff. And oh my God, and it costs as much as a house and all this. So there's a lot to it, and there's a lot to that story. But, by then we had already been investigated by one agency after another. My gosh, I think the BATF had already been in. So there's like all of these reports that, and then I'm military, so they have a 201 that the FBI can pull up like that on me. But the fun one was about maybe like 6 years ago. I don't remember exactly. One of our young men, high school, comes in from Kansas City, and he comes out to a semester, and he just loves it. And we enjoyed it. We said, yeah, he'll be back. He'll definitely be back. Well, he goes back, and he comes in, Sunday night, exhausted, dirty, throws his stuff in the garage, sits down to have a nice warm dinner with his mom and dad, and his aunt's there. And he's like, oh my gosh, this was great, and blah, blah, blah. And he's just excited. And his mom and dad are happy for him. And his aunt's like, what are you talking? What is this thing? And he's like, oh, it's called One Shepherd. And he describes it to her. Well, people don't know this, but the federal government, all of the agencies have a huge footprint in Kansas City. And she just happened to work for the FBI. We learn later, she essentially throws a temper tantrum. She's like, this is this is terrorists. This is, this, all right. And she's like, they're just horrible people. They're bigots and they're racist and they're all, oh my God, how could you let your son go off to a militia? And she's just ranting and raving. She's like, don't let him go to anything else till I do a background check on him. And so we don't see this kid for a year. We're like, what happened to this guy? We're all like, no. Year later, he pops back in. Hi, how you doing? Comes in, registers, comes out. And we're like, hey man, good to see you again. What happened? Did you get hurt? Or, did you get in football? What took you out? And he's like, oh, my aunt, she works for the FBI. And he tells us this whole story. And the rest of the story is, after months and months, she walks in, calls his mom and dad and says, hey, can we have dinner? Yeah. They sit down, have dinner in his kitchen again. And she says, she pushes like a dossier of us across, and she goes, I want you to know, I had several friends do search on these guys. They are completely legitimate. That is one cool program they're running. And yeah, I got to be honest, I was wrong about this. It's fantastic. Go for it. And that just made me, the fact that he came and shared that just made me feel so like warm and fuzzy. I was like, good. We are we are what we say we are, guys. I'll tell you, the scary side is this. We've had people who will call us up or email me and say, hey, I want to come to your training, but do you share your roster with any government agency? And I was like, absolutely not. Never have. We've never even been asked to. We never. And then he's like, so they won't know. Okay, that's good. I'll come. Like, whoa. That's not what I said. And he's like, you said you don't share your roster with them. I was like, no, and we've never been asked you. I promise you walk through that door, you walk through into our training, government knows exactly who you are. Oh, yeah. We've been investigated too many times, guys. They're going to know exactly who you are. There's a paper trail a mile long. There's, credit cards, and think about it. It's like, are you kidding me? No, of course they're going to know who you are, and they should. As far as I'm concerned, well, maybe in a perfect world they shouldn't. I don't know. But, I'm like, don't fool yourself, guy. This is a school. Like, could you go to Princeton and say, I got into Princeton, but the government the government knows you go to Princeton. Yes, they do. No, I got financial aid, but they didn't know a thing.
No, that's funny. People are funny the way that they think that, like you said, there's a paper trail with everything. If the government wants to know if you bought a Tootsie Roll from the dime store, they can find that out. So it's nothing to hide, though. It's like you're saying, your guys are 100% above board. You're not doing anything illegal. You're not affiliated with any weird groups or anything like that. It's exactly what it is. It is a leadership academy that centers around, military training. And that's probably, in my opinion, the best way that you could possibly do it, because It's in our human DNA, especially, yours and mine and guys like us who that got that Nordic background, but it's in our DNA to go to war for young men and even older men to go to battle. And we don't have that these days. It's not like you can get on a long ship and sail to England and conquer. So when we are able to live out that like innate primal urge of us and go and like put on some camis and run around and blast at each other with blanks, it really fulfills a primal need. But not only that, it teaches us such valuable lessons that we can take home to our families, take home to our businesses, take home to our communities. And it really is such an invaluable service that you guys put on there as far as that goes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I absolutely agree. Look, why does the dog chase the car? Because it can. Why does a house cat, chase after birds? Because it can.
Yeah.
It's their primal nature. It is their existence, and that is what humans are. We have our own existence, and to deny that creates an existential crisis. So, absolutely, the trick, the chore, is to find healthy, ethical ways of doing this and coming together in community, in brotherhood,
Yeah.
to learn this, to learn to be a warrior leader. Like we said, there's all these other warrior competencies out there. We did a whole long list of them. Well, guess what? Warrior leadership. Leadership is one of those. And not a small one, right? So right, when we come together in brotherly community and communion, that's absolutely what we're doing, and we're creating safe, healthy, ethical ways for American citizens to come and learn. And frankly, not just American citizens. We have over 600 alumni worldwide. We have warriors from 24 different nationalities.
Wow.
So there's a universality of this, right? There's a desire that is there. So yeah, great.
And bringing in, like you said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I do want to just enhance this. What you said is that coming together in fellowship, in brotherhood, and one shepherd, right? I mean, what is the name one shepherd? It's a shepherd is somebody who watches over their community, right? Their flock. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you guys got the name of one shepherd?
Once again, no original ideas in this head of mine. I don't know if you've ever watched the Penguins of Madagascar and all that stuff, but the Julian guy going, "Yes, I thought of it in this head of mine." So even one shepherd is a ripoff. And the funny thing is, my undergraduate was done at the Shepherd University in West Virginia, so people think that's where it comes from. Not at all. That just happens to be, I mean, it's a cool name. Don't get me wrong. I liked my university, but no, it was about On Killing by Colonel. Oh, help me out here. I've got his books.
Yeah, it's on the tip of my tongue too.
Yes, right. It'll come to me. But anyway, he wrote the series on war and on killing. And in that, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman offers this wonderful analogy of the sheep and the wolf. And what he says is most people are sheep. And everybody goes, they're sheep. And he makes very clear. He's like, no, it's not a pejorative. It's not a pejorative at all. It's a compliment. They're productive. They're the salt of the earth. They get stuff done. That's where the value of humanity lives. It's in the sheep, right? But the sheep are fed on by predators, wolves, right? So some people choose to be predators of the sheep. Well, then you have sheepdogs who look like the wolf. They have claws and fangs and snouts and tails like the wolf, but they choose to be anti-wolf. They choose to be sheepdogs. Now, the funny thing about this is the sheepdogs make the sheep very nervous. They're almost terrified by them, but not quite, because at least in principle, they understand, wait, I think that guy is here to protect me from the predator. So it's a really cool dynamic. And as we were sitting there talking about this, in the mid 1990s, as we developed the school, and we knew we wanted a name beyond the Weston War Games, we realized, hold on, if there's a sheep, then there has to be shepherds. someone has to teach those puppies how to become ethical, capable sheepdogs. And we said, okay, that's what we do here. We take people who want to be sheepdogs, and we help build them, their leaders. And we help build shepherds, for that matter. So that's where the name One Shepherd comes from. One shepherd, one a warrior, one leader, one shepherd. And that talks about our pathway. That literally is our learning pathway. One warrior, you're in the warrior track. One leader, you're in the leader track. One shepherd, you're in the shepherd track. Yeah.
Fascinating. Huh. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. And I don't know how much of this you can discuss, and we're going to leave it to conjecture here. But before we close out, I want to ask you about a current event that's going on. Obviously, Russia is acting pretty rowdy right now. Do you have any thoughts about, what could happen here, or what potentially is going on?
Sure. So I have the advantage of seeing this through multiple lens. The one, that we've talked about is me being a soldier. And so I can see it from that perspective. All of these, by the way, every one of these lenses say, well, this could be potentially just a catastrophe, a humanitarian disaster on just a grandiose scale. But I've worked for, militaries, plural, and I've also worked for, one thing we haven't talked much about is humanitarian human trained systems, which was Department of the Army, but it was anthropologists going in and looking at situations specifically for, conflict situations, whether it's natural disaster, man-made disaster, that means war, or a combination of both, which are called complex disasters. And they looked at, how are we doing in our progress to, to thwart these things, to solve these problems, but also looking at them in their onset, their earliest stages, so that we can learn to sidestep this with diplomacy and with solutions that work. So human terrain really led me into, in an odd sort of way, into my work with the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, which is a sister federal agency to the Department of State that I work for now. And I wound up working here in Washington, D.C. for USAID for 4 years. And so I got to see that and really push what I had learned from HTS, Human Trained Systems, even deeper in humanitarian work. And so I can see it from, and now I work, of course, for diplomatic security, so I can see it from State Department, and I'm paying attention to what you're paying attention, the live feeds coming from the State Department and Secretary of State. It's interesting because, again, this can be disastrous, and I don't want that to happen. I was not taught to hate the Russian people or the Ukrainian people. And in fact, I hold them both in very high esteem. So I don't want to see them go to war. At the same time, I am aware that there is a resurgence of the Russian Empire, and in many ways, this can be healthy, but it certainly can have dark aspects as well. And I feel like maybe rightfully, one of the grievances Putin has is, look, you've caged us in. When we collapsed as a communist, empire in 1989, 1990, America really took every advantage to hem the Russian Federation in. Look where we put our bases and look at the allies we've made. Now, that's not inherently bad. I don't mean to say, oh, we're bad, we're evil. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, my God, imagine if it were flipped, right? Imagine if we had gone bankrupt and then emerged 20 years later to find that, the Soviets are in not just Cuba anymore, but Mexico and Nova Scotia. It's like, whoa, hold on, dude. What are you doing? You're on our doorstep. Give us some breathing room. So I want to be sensitive to that and say that when people are saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be the world's cop and maybe we need to make some concessions here to the Russians. Okay. I'm not saying that's the solution. I am saying, let's entertain it. Let's have a discussion about it. What can be done? How can we bring this, into the fold? But right now, I cannot deny that the Russians look like they are bullying the Ukraine. They seized Crimea. They are pushing they're letting their own army step over and become mercenaries, paid mercenaries in the Donbass regions. I'm like, good God, guys. And now they're putting a heavy power play in Belarus so that Ukraine feels threatened by three fronts, north, south, and east. And so they have a very unenviable position and one that I have great sympathy for. If you ask me where do my sympathies lies, of course, they lie with Ukraine because Russia looks like the aggressor here. So my question is this, Russia trying to forcibly regain territories, such as they did in Georgia and in Chechnya? Or is this something else where they're rattling their sabers to say, hey, let's come back to the negotiation board? I can say that we've missed opportunities as a nation. I personally believe this. This is me speaking for me, not for the federal, United States government, any agency or branch thereof. Me speaking for me, I say I think we've missed opportunities. We missed an opportunity to fight against ISIS with the Russians in Syria.
Yeah.
I think we should have worked much closer with them. And we have to remember that the Russians are not the Soviets. They're not Marxists anymore. Putin has made this clear. He said that to the Dumas last year. He said, no, I don't want to hear about, the communists and bring back communism. You guys had 70 years and you failed. It never worked for us. He was unequivocal about this. So hold on. They're another country and they have their own, traditions, and, we need to respect that. If we're going to play this powerful role in the world, then we need to grow up about it and stop saber rattling. Right now, it's gotten to the point where it is factually the Russians who are saber rattling. And so this bothers me because now we're in reactive mode rather than proactive mode. We need to get back into proactive mode. We need to seize the initiative. And by that, I mean through information and diplomacy. And if we have to, the DIME, D-I-M-E, diplomacy, information, military, and economics, let's put that M to the side. It's never off the table. It's never gonna be off the table. By the way, just so we're clear, I think the UK and the US sending all of those small arms and ammunition for their anti-tank, anti-aircraft, and small arms, I think that's brilliant. That's exactly the right move, right? It's like, okay, well, we're not deploying troops there, but we are showing our resolve to back the Ukrainians. So I like that, but that's only just your first move. Let's get us back to the negotiation table and let's seek the initiative and be proactive and say, look, Russia, what's going to make you feel better about this? What's going to, what are the solutions in Ukraine? What are the solutions for Russia? What are the solutions for Belarus? Everyone should win. Estonia and Lithuania and Poland and Hungary, they should win here too. There's a lot of people with a lot of things at stake. And so I want to see a peaceful solution.
I hope to God that we do. Putin seems pretty hell-bent on Ukraine not ever joining NATO, which is, right now they're their own country. They should be able to do whatever they want. Like, kind of crazy. Do you think that if this were to happen, and it looks, just from all of the information that's been coming at us from all different angles, all of the troop movements, all of the ships that are going all to and fro, it looks like he's pretty damn serious about this to some degree. Do you think that if he were to actually pull the trigger and go in there, that Taiwan would be taken at the same point while we were distracted with that?
Yeah. So the question is, could a military incursion be the tripwire for another world war? Right. And
Right.
the answer is, my God, yes. My God, yes. Invading Poland was the tripwire for another world war. Shooting Archduke Ferdinand was the tripwire for another world war. Russia invading Ukraine could, I'm not saying would, but certainly could set off a chain of events that are not containable and push us to the brink of disaster. And not just for Russia or Ukraine, but for the rest of the world. Yeah, there is that. When you have players this big, this powerful, these are these are not small little tremors. These are monumental fault lines that can set off cataclysmic earthquakes, so to speak. Yeah, the potential's there. I want to see victory, and I'm not 100% convinced that the Russians really are trying to reclaim Ukraine, but clearly they are pushing for something, and maybe that's more concessions to their traditional regions of influence, right?
Well, you say that you're not convinced that this is what is actually happening, and I'm not either, for that matter. We'll just touch on this. It seems to me very odd that Putin's one of the smarter world leaders on the stage right now, in my personal opinion. Russians have a big history of deception and the art of war and everything. It seems comical almost to me that he would let himself get involved in something like this, where this could turn into another Afghanistan for them. This could turn into, terrorism crossing their borders and just mass casualties. He knows this, and he knows it's not going to work out well for him either economically. So I'm trying to get it through my head. Why is he doing this? Is it just a massive, massive all-in bluff, which doesn't also seem correct to me? I can't get through my head what exactly is going on here. Do you have any kind of guesswork as far as that goes?
Well, yeah, like I said, it's an emboldened, empowered Russia. And let me stop there and say that's what I want. I want a strong China. I want a strong Russia. I want a strong Germany and UK and Canada and Australia. I want strong allies, strong partners. And even when they're not specifically allies, look, as each empire implodes, whether it does quickly or slowly, this just gives rise to more war, more violence, more economic instability, more instability across the spectrum of stability. And so, I don't want people living under tyranny. I don't want people living under oppression. But at the same time, I do want strong nationalities, national groups, China and Russia. I really, truly want them to be strong. Because if they're strong, then they negotiate strong, then we have better economics, and all ships rise on high tide, right? This is Keynesian, economic theory, I guess. But the point here is that I want everyone to win. I'm human. I'm in that regard, I guess I'm a bleeding heart, classical liberal, not unlike Thomas Jefferson and Tom Paine and all of the others. So I want people to be successful, right? And I want nations to be successful, because I see strong nations means, in most cases, strong nations means less war and less famine and disease, and higher standards of living. So I want them to do that. At the same time, I don't want them to oppress their neighbors. And so there is a very good question of, hey, Estonia and Hungary and Poland and Finland and Sweden, and Ukraine, do you have the right to enter, NATO? Well, they're sovereign nations, so yes, they should have that right. But then again, they need to make those decisions wisely and not naively. So they're sovereign nations. That sovereignty must be protected. I agree, absolutely. And I think this military exercise in Belarus, it's provocative by intention. Putin is trying to bring the EU, NATO, the US to the negotiating table. And I think we need to do that to some degree. This isn't a 1938 Chamberlain moment. I'm not saying appeasement. And I know that's what it sounds like I'm saying. We all know how that ended disastrously for the entire world. Chamberlain, Prime Minister of England in 1938, made a private peace pact with Hitler that Hitler had no intention of respecting. And and then it was the invasion of Poland and the phony war, the one moment in time where France and England could have invaded and won against, Nazi Germany in in 1939 and 40. And we lost those opportunities at great human cost. So I'm not for appeasement. At the same time, Chamberlain wasn't entirely wrong to say, hey, can we find a peaceful solution? I think you have a new power that has risen in Russia. That can be a very good thing if we work with them.
Well said. Well said. I can't put it any better than that. And, I will just add that I really like the way that you're thinking about that, as far as if we're all powerful, that only creates better economics for everybody involved. Like I like your analogy with the rising ships on the high tide. It's the truth. With that being said, we'll have to keep an eye on this, because it certainly is makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. After the past 2 years that we've had and we've seen, nothing's off the table at this point. So all the more reason to honestly, go out there and get some leadership training. It really is like people. There's two schools of thoughts in this, and there's two camps. People say, why the hell would you go and do that? And people say, that's freaking awesome. And so most of us on these channels are in that other school of thought that says that's freaking awesome. So guys, go check out One Shepherd. All right. OneShepherd.com. That's with the number one shepherd.com. Check it out. You can't go wrong. And if you can make it out, we'd love to see you out there. Dr. Larsen, dude, I've had such a great conversation with you here, and I appreciate you coming on and giving us some of your time, man. So thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me just come in here and flap my gums. Not, my family is, we've heard it. We don't want to hear it again. So, this is fun.
Yeah, no, it definitely has been. And at some point, maybe we can get you back on and, be looking forward to another conversation down the line somewhere. So
wonderful. I'm looking forward.
All right. Well, thanks again, man. And ladies and gentlemen, until next time, please remember that you are your first and last line of defense. And I will see you on the next Tactical Podcast.